Good morning. We're going to start the Sugya of Chanuka this morning. Good Chodesh again. But, yesterday was Rosh Chodesh. Beis Cheshvan, we're going to start the Sugya of Chanuka, and Mi'at Shem, we're going to finish it with Halacha by Chanuka. The Sugya actually begins on Daf Chof Aleph, Amud Aleph, in Masechta Shabbos. However, in order to understand the Sugya, we need to understand the context in which it was said. First of all, we need to understand that when we talk about the first Beis Hamikdash, we go to the books of the Nevi'im. We can go to the book of Malachim and see Shlomo building the first Beis Hamikdash. We can go forward into the book of Malachim and see the division between Northern Kingdom and the Southern Kingdom, ultimately the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash at the end of the second book of Malachim, Malachim Beis. We can go to Yirmiyah, Yecheskel, Yeshaya, and see the prophecies that were said during the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash. During the first Beis Hamikdash, Nevi'im were alive, and they recorded for us the events of the first Beis Hamikdash and the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash. Approximately 40 years into the second Beis Hamikdash, the last of the Nevi'im, who was Malachi, Chagai, Zechariah, and Malachi were the last of the Nevi'im. Malachi was the last. Somewhere about 40 years into the second Beis Hamikdash, Malachi dies, and that brings an end for that part of history to Nevi'im. We have no Nevi'im, and Mi'at Hashem, we're told that when Mashiach comes, prophecy will return. But we do not have Nevi'im since Malachi died, about 40 years into the second Beis Hamikdash. The second Beis Hamikdash stood for 420 years. That means that for the last 380 years of the second Beis Hamikdash, there were no Nevi'im. At that point in time, we go into a tekufa that we call Tanoim. The Tanoim pick up. So if you learn the first perek of Masechta Avos, Masechta Avos in the first chapter, besides teaching us a lot of derech, a lot of hadracha in how to live, it's a history lesson. Moshe kibel Torah miSinai. Moshe got the Torah from Sinai. Umasora Leoshua, and then he gave it over. Why am I getting audio echoes? I'm not sure. Anyone else having a problem with echoes? Okay, we'll do the best we can. Moshe received the Torah from Hashem. He passed it on to Yoshua. Yoshua passed it on to the Shoftim. Each Shofet passed it on to the next Shofet. And the Shoftim, Moshe Kibel Torah Misin Misor Yoshua. Yoshua is Canaan, was Canaan, Misarul Anchik Nes Hagdola. And then the Shoftim, and then Anchik Nes Hagdola had Nevi'im. And then Nevi'im came to an end. After the Nevi'im came to an end, we have Tanoim. If you go through the first perek of Masechta Avos, you have the lists of the Tanoim generation by generation. Shimon HaTzadik was the last member of the Anshe Knesses Hagdola. After Shimon HaTzadik, his Talmud was Antignos Ish Socho. Now listen to that name. Antignos Ish Socho. This is the beginning of Pirkei Avos. The first Mishnah talks about Moshe Kibel Torah miSinai, and then it goes to Shimon HaTzadik being the last of the Anshe Knesses Hagdola who lived at the beginning of the second Beis Hamikdash. And his student is Antignos Ish Socho. Antignos is obviously a Greek name, and we have a Tana who's called Antignos. Whatever reason, his family named him Antignos, but that tells us something about what's going on in Eretz Yisrael. at that time. So if you open your Pirkei Avos or your Siddur after Shabbos Mincha, you'll see right there at the beginning of Pirkei Avos, Antigonos Ish Socha. So early on in the second Beis Hamikdash, the Greek Syrians took control of Eretz Yisrael from the Persians. Right? Babylon, the Bavliim destroyed the first Beis Hamikdash. The Persians conquered Bavel, and at the end of the Persian Empire, they gave us permission to finish building the second Beis Hamikdash. Second Beis Hamikdash was completed, and then the Greek Syrians defeated the Persians. So most of the second Beis, a good part of the second Beis Hamikdash is dominated by Greek Syrian sovereignty. And there you have it. You have a Tana at the beginning of Pirkei Avos. His name is Antigonos Ish Socha. But what does that tell us about Chanuka? What that tells us about Chanuka is 40 years into the second Beis Hamikdash, give or take a few years, there are no Nevi'im. How do I know what occurred during the second Beis Hamikdash if there are no Nevi'im alive to record it for me? We have no books of Nevi'im about the second Beis Hamikdash. What is recorded is only through the Tanoim in the Mishnah and the Amoraim in the Gemara. The Tanoim in the Mishnah are the ones that lived during the second Beis Hamikdash. The Amoraim lived after the second Beis Hamikdash, and they are the ones that the Amoraim had the Messiah of what happened during the second Beis Hamikdash. But we don't have books of Nevi'im about the second Beis Hamikdash. Therefore, to the extent we know about the miracle of Chanuka, there is no book of the Nevi'im. You cannot go to the bookshelf and say, let me look up Yecheskel or Yirmiyah or Yeshaya or Malachim and read the story of Chanuka. It doesn't exist. There were no Nevi'im. In order to understand what happened in the second Beis Hamikdash, and specifically what happened on Chanuka, we need to turn to the Tanoim who lived during that time in the second Beis Hamikdash, and the Amoraim who lived after the second Beis Hamikdash, but had a Kabbalah. They had a Masorah transmission of the events of the second Beis Hamikdash. Is anyone else having a problem with echoes? Having a message from Mr. Leibowitz that he's hearing echoes. Is anyone else having a problem with an echo? Okay, it doesn't appear that way. All right, again, we'll do the best we can. So to the extent that we're going to be able to know what happened in the second Beis Hamikdash, and specifically Chanuka, we're going to have to learn Gemara. The famous question is, why are there not Mishnayos about Chanuka? And we'll leave that question for now. There's obviously no books in the Nevi'im about Chanuka, because the last Navi Malachi died early on in the second Beis Hamikdash before Chanuka. But there are Tanoim that are alive. And Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, who authored the Mishnayos, who did not live during the second Beis Hamikdash. He lived after the second Beis Hamikdash. But he could have authored Mishnayos about Chanuka. He did not. There's barely a reference. We'll see the one reference, not today, but we'll see a reference to Chanuka in a Mishnah that deals with, it's a Baba Kama type of Mishnah. It deals with a Chanuka menorah that's outside someone's home or business and does damage. It causes a fire to someone else's property. It is in that context that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi wrote a Mishnah, but Rabbi Yehuda Nasi did not write a set of Mishnayos here are the rules of Chanuka. He wrote a set of Mishnayos about the rules for Purim, Masechta Megillah, but he did not write a Masechta called Masechta Chanuka. And we'll leave that for now. We don't have a Masechta Chanuka, therefore our main source of information about what is Chanuka, what happened, the laws of Chanuka, becomes the Gemara. How did this Gemara end up in Masechta Shabbos? It ends up in Masechta Shabbos because it's in the Perek Bameh Madlikin. And Bameh Madlikin, for those who daven Ashkenaz, Friday night, before Baruch Hu, you say the Perek Bameh Madlikin Uvameh Ein Madlikin. So in your Gemara Shabbos, and Daf Chaf Amud Beis, you have a Mishnah. It says Bameh Madlikin Uvameh Ein Madlikin. What kind of oil can you use to light Chanukah, to light Shabbos licht, and what kind of wicks can you use to light Shabbos licht? You can't use any oil and you can't use any wick. There are certain wicks and oils that are not permitted to be used on Shabbos. Why? We'll see in a moment. Because of this discussion, because of this Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi wrote a Mishnah, Daf Chaf Amud Beis and Shabbos, it's called Bameh Madlikin. And because he introduced us to the subject, what oil, what wick can you use to light Shabbos? The Gemara then says, oh, what oil, what wick can you use to light on Chanukah? Again, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi could have put it in this Mishnah. What oil, what wick can you use on Shabbos and can't use on Shabbos? What oil and wick can you use on Chanukah and can you not use on Chanukah? He didn't do that. He left out Chanukah for reasons, again, we're not going to discuss today, but Blined will get to. The Mishnah is written as what oil, what wicks can be used on Shabbos and what oil and wicks cannot be used on Shabbos. The Gemara in its commentary on the Mishnah says, oh, now, by the way, if we're talking about oils and wicks for Shabbos, let us now talk about oils and wicks for Chanukah. So now let's start the Gemara. We're on Shabbos, Daf Chaf Aleph, Amud Aleph. Chaf Aleph, Amud Aleph. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. 15 lines from the top of the Gemara. The line begins, Amar Rabba. Rabba said the following. He wants to know why there are certain oils and certain wicks that cannot be used on Shabbos. What's the problem? Why are there wicks and oils that you're not allowed to use to light your licht on Shabbos? So Rabbi explains, Amar Rabba. Psilos she'amru chachamim ein madlikim behem b'Shabbos. Wicks that chachamim said you cannot use on Shabbos. Remember, we're not talking about Chanukah yet. We're only talking about Shabbos. But we need to get an understanding of what the problem is with certain wicks and certain oils on Shabbos, and then we can apply it to Chanukah. But we're only talking about Shabbos now. Amar Rabba, Psila she'amru chachamim ein madlikin bahem b'Shabbos. The wicks that chachamim said you cannot use on Shabbos to light your licht, mipnei she'or misachseches bahem. Rashi has two explanations to the word misachseches. First, Rashi says, Kemin sakin peguma misachseches habasa. Misachseches means sort of to rip. If you have a knife that has nicks in it, and you want to cut meat, or if you want to shech the animal, the shechita is going to be puzzled because the nick in the knife will not allow for a clean shechita. It's going to rip the animal's neck instead of cutting it. But if you want to cut a piece of meat and you have a knife that has niches in it, the knife is going to get caught in the meat and it's not going to be able to give you a straight cut. The same idea, Rashi says, Keminsakin peguma mesachseches bebasa she'ein olo zokov v'noach b'mokam echad ela nida v'kofetz. The word mesachseches means it's going to be crooked. The cut's going to be crooked. And the same thing is true when you use oils, or right now we're talking about wicks. You use wicks that are not good wicks. What's going to happen is the oil will flow into the wick and the wick will flicker. The flame will flicker. Instead of having a nice straight flame, the oil going up into the wick and giving you a nice straight flame at the top of the wick, instead of that, the flame will flicker. It'll go up and down, left to right. It'll flicker because the wick is not drawing the oil into it well. And the more difficult it is for the wick to draw the oil, the more difficult it will be for the light to shine as a straight upstanding light. And why do we want this to happen on Shabbos? Well, if you use one of these type of wicks that will cause the flame at the top to flicker, on Shabbos, those days, no electricity, you have this lighter and you have wicks and the flame is flickering and it's driving you crazy. You can't read, you can't see well because the light's flickering. What will you do when you forget for the moment that it's Shabbos? You will put your hand on that wick or on the lighter and you'll try to adjust the lighter or the wick so that it stops flickering. When you do that, you are doing, whether it's unintentional, but what you're doing is the malacha of havara. You are creating a fire that's flickering, and you adjust it so that it burns well. That's the malacha of havara. You're creating a fire. So therefore, Chachamim said, we're going to give you a list of wicks that you cannot use on Shabbos, because the oil doesn't flow well through these wicks, with the result that the flame at the top will flicker back and forth. And if you forget that it's Shabbos, you will adjust the wick and the oil, and that's the malacha of havara. Therefore, Chachamim prohibited the use of these wicks. Lishna Acharina says, another explanation to this idea of misachseches, Misachseches behem eina nechneses teich hapsila. The oil doesn't go in the psila. Elasov mi bachutz kemo sichsecha avona. Sichsecha can mean it encircles or it envelops. These kind of wicks that are prohibited do not absorb the oil. The oil remains around the wick. Instead of going inside the wick and up the wick to create a flame, it envelops the wick, and some of the oil is absorbed into the wick and creates a very, very shaky flame. Either way, the two pshatim of Rashi, what does the word misachseches mean? The first pshat of Rashi, misachseches, means it's like a nick. It's not straight. The oil at the top will not be straight. It'll flicker, and you will forget, and you will adjust it on Shabbos, which is havara, making a fire. Rashi's second pshat misachseches says that it simply means envelop. The oil remains around the wick, doesn't go up the wick. Again, you're going to have a flickering flame. You'll forget it Shabbos. You'll adjust it malacha havara. So there's a list in the Mishnah on Chafam and Beis that we didn't read. There's a list of wicks Chachamim say you cannot use on Shabbos because these wicks do not absorb the oil well. The flame will flicker. You'll forget it Shabbos, or if you forget it Shabbos, and you will adjust it and do the malacha of Ara. Therefore, you cannot use these wicks. That's the wick rule. Now, there are certain oils that the Mishnah and Daf Chafam Rebbe says you cannot use. So now Rabbah continues to explain on Chafala from Aleph. Shmanim she'amru chachomim ein madlikin bahem. Oils that the Chacham say you cannot use on Shabbos. Mipnei she'ein nimshochem acha hapsila, because they do not absorb into the wick. Same exact problem. The first problem was the wicks are not the type of material that will easily absorb oil, and therefore the flame will flicker. The problem with the oils are it's a type of oil that will not go into the wick, and therefore to the extent they get absorbed a little, you will again get a flickering flame. You will again, if you forget it Shabbos, adjust the oil or the wick, and you'll do the malacha of Avara. Therefore, Chachamim said, and Daf Chaf Amud Beis, which for Nusach Ashkenaz you say every Friday night, Bameh Madlikin, what oils and wicks can you use? Ubameh Ein Madlikin, and what wicks and oils are you not allowed to use on Shabbos? The list is in the Mishnah. Rabbah gives us the reason. You cannot use these wicks because the wicks will not give you a straight flame, mesachseches. The oils you cannot use because they don't go into the wick and are not absorbed. In either case, wicks and oils, these types of wicks and oils will create a flickering flame. If you forget it Shabbos, you'll adjust the oil or the wick, and you can chas v'sholom do the malacha of lighting a fire on Shabbos. So Chachamim said, here's the list. You cannot use the following wicks. You cannot use the following oil on Shabbos. That's the sugya that we need to know about the problem with certain wicks and the problem with certain oils. Now we're going to begin the sugya of Beis Hamikdash, and then we go to the sugya of Chanuka. The Gemara now is going to have a discussion. If these wicks and oils can't be used on Shabbos, could they have been used in the Beis Hamikdash? The Beis Hamikdash, you light a menorah also. In the Beis Hamikdash, do I have to worry if I use these oils that the light will flicker? Remember, right now we've been dealing only with a Shabbos problem. We don't want to use these wicks and oils because they may not give you a good flame. You'll forget, adjust it on Shabbos, and you'll do the malacha of Avot. What about the Beis Hamikdash? You want to use these wicks and oils on a Sunday night, a Monday night, a Tuesday night, a Wednesday night, a Thursday night, even a Friday night. You want to use these wicks and oils in the Beis Hamikdash. Can you use these wicks and oils in the Beis Hamikdash? And now we're going to skip down 2, 3, 4, 5 lines from where the lines get wide. A few words into the line. There are 2 dots. Tani Rami Bar Chama. Rami Bar Chama taught us the following. Psilos, wicks, ushmanim, and oil, she'amru chachamim ein madlikin ben b'Shabbos, that the chachamim said you cannot use on Shabbos. Ein madlikin bahem b'mikdash. You cannot use these oils and these wicks in the Beis Hamikdash either. Why? What's the problem in the Beis Hamikdash? There's no Shabbos issue right now. I want to use these oils and these wicks on a Sunday night in the Beis Hamikdash to light the menorah. So you're going to tell me, well, these oils and these wicks cause a flame to flicker. Okay, so they cause the flame to flicker. Maybe the Kohen will go in there to adjust it. That's okay, it's Sunday night. Maybe he won't go in there to adjust it. Okay, so he won't go in there to adjust it. What is the problem with using these flickering flames and wicks in the Beis Hamikdash. It's not a Shabbos issue. So Rami Bar Chama said the oils and the wicks you cannot use on Shabbos, you cannot use in the Beis Hamikdash. Mishum Shenema, Rami Bar Chama tells us because the pasuk says in Pashas Tetzaveh, when we get the commandment to light the menorah in the Beis Hamikdash, the pasuk says laha'alos ner tamid, to light a constant fire. Okay, so that's what it says. You light a constant fire, which means you light the menorah every day. Constant doesn't mean here, we talked about this in Masechta Tamid. Sometimes the word tamid means constantly, and sometimes the word tamid means consistently. We talk about the korban tamid. The korban tamid was brought in the morning and in the afternoon. It wasn't brought constantly the whole day. They kept on slaughtering animals the whole day. It means it was done consistently every morning and every afternoon. That's called tamid. Some things mean it has to be constant. Lahalos ner tamid. You don't light the menorah constantly. You light it consistently every day. But Rami Bar Chama says that these words, lahalos, to lift up a constant, or to lift up the consistent light, meaning to light the menorah, teaches you cannot use these oils and wicks that cause flickering. And the Gemara doesn't understand where A equals B. What does this pasuk have to do with the oils and the wicks that flicker? So the Gemara asks, and the Gemara tells us, who Tanila v'hu amala. Rami Bar Chama quoted the pasuk, and he also explained what he meant, because without the explanation, we don't know what the words lahalos ner tamid have to do with a flickering flame. Kedei shetehei shel heves ole me'eleha. The words in the pasuk, Hashem said to Moshe, when you light the menorah, it is leha'alos ner tamid. The ner tamid, the consistent light that is lit every day, should be leha'alos, should go up. Aliyah, it should go up. And since it says it should go up, from here we learn that the flame should go up. Meaning, the Kohen goes to the menorah, he lights the menorah the way he lights it. We learned about that a great deal in Masechta Tamid. He lights it, and the flame goes up by itself. The pasuk says, leha'alos ner tamid. The flame should go up, meaning that the Kohen doesn't have to fool around with the wick to get it to light. He should be able to put a light to the menorah, to the wick, whatever light he used. We learned that about that Masechta Tamid, the Ner Maravi, the westernmost Ner. We studied that in Masechta Tamid. However he lights it, the point is, he puts the flame to the wick, and boom, the flame goes up by itself. It means that the Kohen doesn't have to play and fool around with the wick until the wick is lit. That is the meaning of laha'alos ner tamid. The light of the menorah should go up. The way it goes up is as soon as you light it, it goes up. If it starts flickering, the Kohen's going to have to start adjusting it and playing with it. From here, Rami Bar Chama teaches us that whatever oil and wicks Chachamim told us flicker, and therefore you can't use it on Shabbos, those oils and wicks can't be used in the Beis Hamikdash because they will flicker. And the way you light the menorah, the Torah and the Rebbeinu Shalom tells us, is lahalos. The flame should go up. You light it and it goes up. I don't want you playing with it and adjusting with it. Rabbi Bar Chama therefore concludes oils and wicks that are listed that you don't use on Shabbos, those oils and wicks cannot be used in the Beis Hamikdash. Now, Rabbi Isai, let's put on our thinking caps for a moment. We put on our thinking caps for a moment, and we have a kasha on Rami Bar Chama that, for all intent and purposes, based upon the clear words of Rabbi Bar Chama, there's no answer to this kasha. And the kasha is Rabbi Akiva Eger's kasha. Everybody remember what kind of oil has to be used in the menorah in the Beis Hamikdash? The pasuk says, Shemen Zayizah. It has to be pure olive oil. So let's leave out the wicks for a moment. Rami Bar Chama just came and told me a rule. All oils that you can't use on Shabbos because they flicker, you can't use in the Beis Hamikdash because they flicker. And if they flicker, it will violate the rule of lahalos ner tamid. The light must go up without adjusting. This has nothing to do at all with Shemen Zayis. It doesn't make a difference whether, let's, for example, take, let's make believe corn oil. Let's make believe corn oil is a wonderful light. It's a wonderful oil. And when you put it in your licht on Shabbos, that licht is perfect. Let's assume for the moment that you can use corn oil. I'm not saying you can or you can't. I'm just saying let's assume. Let's assume corn oil can be used on Shabbos to light your licht. Would you be allowed to use corn oil to light the menorah in the Beis Hamikdash? No. Why can't you use corn oil to light the menorah in the Beis Hamikdash? Not because it flickers or it doesn't flicker. Doesn't make a difference if it flickers or it doesn't flicker. It has to be olive oil. It's a strict rule. I don't care if something else is as good as olive oil. It lights nicer and better than olive oil. It doesn't make an iota of a difference to me. The only oil for the Beis Hamikdash menorah is olive oil. So what does Rami Bar Chama mean when he says any oil and any wick that you can't use on Shabbos because the light flickers, you can't use on the menorah in the Beis Hamikdash because the light will flicker? There are plenty of oils that don't flicker, but I still can't use them in the Beis Hamikdash because it's got to be olive oil. The most that can be relevant from Rami Bar Chama's statement is that wicks that can't be used on Shabbos cannot be used in the Beis Hamikdash. Okay, the wicks on Shabbos flicker, and therefore I don't want you using those wicks in the Beis Hamikdash because they flicker, and that will cause the problem of lahalos ner tamid. But oils, the issue of flickering has no relevance to the Beis Hamikdash. I don't care if it flickers or doesn't flicker. It's got to be olive oil. You can give me an oil that's 100 times better than olive oil. It's clearer, it's brighter, it's nicer, it doesn't flicker at all, and I still can't use in the Beis Hamikdash. So if you have a Gemara in front of you, and you look towards the bottom of your page, depending upon what print you have, in your Gemara, at the bottom or at the side, there's something called the Gilion Hashas. The notes on the Gemara. These are Rabbi Akiva Eger's handwritten notes to the Gemara. And when the Gemaras were published later, they typeset them into the Gemara. So this is what Rabbi Akiva Eger wrote about Rami Bar Chama's statement. Shmanim upsilos ein madlikim b'hem b'mikdash. Rabbi Bar Chama said oils and wicks you can't use on Shabbos, you can't use in the Beis Hamikdash. Why? Because it can't flicker. Kosherly, Rabbi Akiva Eger says this is difficult for me to understand. Lamai nakat shmanim. Why is Rabbi Bar Chama talking about oils here? Ha b'mikdash ein madlikim rak b'shemen zayis zach. The only oil that can be used in the Beis Hamikdash, the Rebbeinu Shalom told Moshe, there's no oil that can be used in the menorah of the Beis Hamikdash except olive oil. It has nothing to do with flicker or not flicker. You can only use olive oil. So Rami Bar Chama's statement, oils, wicks that flicker, you can't use it on Shabbos. And if you can't use it on Shabbos because they flicker, you can't use it in the Beis Hamikdash because they flicker. And what about the oils that you use on Shabbos that don't flicker? They're fine for Shabbos. As an example I use, I'm not saying it's true, I'm just using an example. Corn oil, let's assume you can use it on Shabbos. According to Rami Bar Chama, it would sound like if you can't use oil on Shabbos, you can't use it on Chanuka. If you can use it on Shabbos, if you can't, oils that you can't use on Shabbos, you can't use in the Beis Hamikdash. But oils you can use on Shabbos, you can use in the Beis Hamikdash. That is a false statement. Oils that you can use on Shabbos, you still can't use in the Beis Hamikdash. It must be olive oil. So if Rami Bar Chama wanted to analogize Shabbos, the Beis Hamikdash, that's all he could have said was wicks that can be used on Shabbos can be used in the Beis Hamikdash. Wicks that can't be used on Shabbos because they flicker, those wicks can't be used in the Beis Hamikdash because of the pasuk of lahalos ner tamid. The light should not flicker and need adjustment. But in terms of oils, you cannot analogize the Beis Hamikdash to Shabbos because there are plenty of oils you can use on Shabbos that don't flicker, but you still can't use in the Beis Hamikdash because the Beis Hamikdash needs shemen zayasaf olive oil. So what is Rami Bar Chama's statement? Oils and wicks that you can't use on Shabbos, those oils and wicks you can't use in the Beis Hamikdash. That is true for wicks. It is not true for oil. So Rabbi Akiva Eiger says, kosherly, I don't understand why Rami Bar Chama used the words oils and wicks. His rule is only relevant to wicks. Flickering has nothing to do with oil in the Beis Hamikdash. Even if it doesn't flicker, you can't use it. So on Shabbos, there are oils that flicker, you can't use it. There are oils that do that light well, you can use them. The Beis Hamikdash, I don't care about flickering or not flickering. It has to be olive oil. Therefore, Rami Bar Chama's statement, oils and wicks, appears to be problematic. At most, Rami Bar Chama should have said was wicks that you can't use on Shabbos, you cannot use in the Beis Hamikdash. Okay, so that is our piece of Gemara for today. We haven't started Chanuka yet. We're still figuring out the oils and the wicks that can or cannot be used on Shabbos. We're now in the Beis Hamikdash, and we have Rabbi Akiva Eiger's question. And I'm looking at the sheet of the schedule. The next Gemara shir will be on Thursday at 9:30. We'll continue in Yet Shem on Thursday with oils and wicks in the Beis Hamikdash. It's a very short Sugya. And after that, the Gemara goes right into oils and wicks for Chanuka.